I have seen it all, and now you work with me.
The white lights of the main lobby reflected off the polished floor, as if each step echoed the weight of the luxurious surroundings. The sound of hurried heels mingled with the clicking of cell phones and the rustle of elegant briefcases carried by staff, dressed as if each day were a formal hearing. Amidst the arrogantly uplifted faces and indifferent expressions, one figure stood out. Not because of her clothing or posture, but because of the silent intensity of embarrassment in her eyes. CEO Ji-hoon, in her early 20s, remained motionless in the face of a public attack she hadn't provoked. Min Seo, her direct boss, pointed with the coldness of someone who knows that words can hurt more than a lash. In front of her colleagues, the woman launched accusations without hesitation. Useless, irresponsible, a disappointment to the department. Each sentence was like a gunshot, and no one there seemed willing to stop her. The looks around her varied between silent derision and the convenience of omission, as if the spectacle of humiliation had become part of the workday. Ha-eun, her eyes fixed on the floor and the worn folder clutched to her chest, couldn't find the strength to respond. Her entire body trembled, but not with guilt. It trembled with suppressed indignation, with helplessness in the face of an accusation she knew was unjust. What none of those onlookers imagined was that, within the cold walls of the company, there were unblinking eyes, strategically placed. Cameras recorded every movement, every word, every judgmental glance, and on a floor above, isolated from the hubbub, the company's CEO, Ji-hoon Park, observed it all. His eyes never left the screen. He wasn't the type of man to make hasty decisions, but there, faced with brutality disguised as hierarchy, something began to change within him. And it was in that silent moment where everyone thought nothing would change that a choice began to form. Because when power stands by and watches, injustice without acting, something inevitably breaks. And Ji-hoon was about to prove that not all authority hides behind mirrored walls. If this scene touched you, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. And leave a like to continue following each twist and turn of this story. Seo Ha-eun wasn't just the shy young woman carrying a worn briefcase. She was the reflection of a life marked by sacrifices and small sacrifices that piled up like stones along the way. Born in Busan, in a remote neighborhood where the narrow streets held the scent of fresh fish from the market and the sound of the tides lapping against the piers, she grew up amidst hardships that shaped her quiet but resilient personality. From an early age, she learned that dreams only came true when accompanied by effort, and that nothing would come for free to someone like her. Her father had passed away too soon, leaving only fragmented memories of a warm laugh and hands calloused from work. He was left with his mother who, after years of constant effort, bore the scars of illness that forced her to depend on the meager change her daughter brought in. Ha-eun, still a teenager, took on roles that weren't hers: student, worker, makeshift nurse, and above all, the invisible pillar of a fragile home. Each morning in Busan began before sunrise, as she hurried through alleys, balancing trays at local restaurants, or delivering packages at convenience stores, always with the same tired but determined expression. And even when her body cried out for rest, her heart beat for something greater. She dreamed of attending university, studying design, and perhaps one day seeing her creations displayed in the brightly lit shop windows of Seoul's avenues. She kept magazine clippings hidden in a cardboard box under her bed, as if they were relics of a future that seemed too distant. Her childhood friends told her it was madness, that a girl of humble origins wouldn't fit in a world where surnames mattered more than talent. Still, Ha-eun persisted. When she finally landed a temporary job in Seoul at a high-end events company, she believed it would be the first concrete step toward the future she'd always dreamed of. She held out hope that if she gave her all, someone would notice her dedication and open a door that had previously been inaccessible. However, reality proved crueler. Instead of recognition, she found condescending glances, venomous comments about her simple attire, and burdensome tasks no one else wanted to take on. And on that fateful morning, when she was dragged into the center of public humiliation, the entire weight of her trajectory seemed to crumble in the face of screams that unjustly condemned her. But what Ha-eun couldn't imagine was that, behind the cold walls and silent cameras, someone with absolute power watched every detail of her pain with relentless attention. Fate, until then indifferent to his struggle, began to move in visible pieces. The question hanging in the air was simple and disturbing. What would happen when that hidden gaze finally decided to act? The company's main hall in Gangnam was packed with employees that late morning. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the expensive perfume of women milling about in high heels and the firm steps of men in sharp suits. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally until a shrill voice cut through the air like a blade, halting conversations and freezing movement. Min Seo, the manager responsible for coordinating that evening's event, erupted in fury, her eyes flashing with arrogance. At the center of her wrath was Ha-eun, the young temporary assistant who was trying to balance folders and papers with trembling hands. "Have you no shame?" Min Seo's voice echoed through the large space, drawing everyone's gaze. "Ruining reports of this importance like an absent-minded child." Ha-eun, stunned, clutched the papers she was carrying even tighter to her chest. He tried to open his mouth, but the barrage of accusations was too quick. Min Seo took a step forward, her heels echoing like hammer blows on the marble floor. "Useless," she continued, oblivious to the crowd around her, always getting in the way, always in the wrong place, always bringing shame to this industry. Ha-eun's classmates, who minutes before had been laughing among themselves in small circles, now watched in complicit silence. Some looked away, embarrassed, while others hid discreet smiles, as if this humiliation were unexpected entertainment amidst the tedium of their daily routine. Ha-eun took a deep breath, her throat burning. She knew she hadn't made a mistake, but how could she prove it in the face of the manager's authority? The folders she carried weren't even her responsibility. She'd simply been sent to deliver them. Still, any attempt at explanation seemed futile in the face of the storm of sharp words. "If you think you can hide behind that pitiful expression, you're wrong." Min Seo stepped forward, lifting the documents and throwing them back at Ha-eun. The sheets scattered across the polished floor, sliding between the employee's feet, as if her very dignity had been thrown to the wind. Ha-eun's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her body trembled, not from guilt, but from the shame of being exposed in front of so many. Her teary eyes met, for a brief second, those of a nearby secretary, who quickly looked away, unable to bear the reflection of that pain. And as the scene unfolded, the corridors seemed to narrow, the walls closing in on her until there was no more room to breathe. Min Seo's cruel words were daggers that left no visible marks, but cut with even greater intensity. Ha-eun wanted to scream, wanted to defend herself, but her voice felt trapped in the back of her throat. Then, in a theatrical gesture, Min Seo turned to the other employees and declared, "People like that don't deserve to be in this company. They're a disgrace to us all." A heavy silence fell, as if everyone awaited the inevitable outcome. Ha-eun, on her knees, slowly gathered the scattered leaves, each gesture more painful than the last, as if gathering together the shattered pieces of her own soul. But what no one there imagined was that every second of that scene wasn't just being played out in front of dozens of witnesses in the ballroom. It was also being recorded by unblinking cameras, transmitting every detail to a floor above, where watchful eyes watched in silence. Ji-hoon Park, staring at the screens in his living room, never looked away. His face remained impenetrable, but within him a decision began to form. And as Min Seo raised his voice to deliver the final sentence, a question lingered. How long would he remain silent? High atop the glass tower overlooking Gangnam City, the CEO's office remained plunged into an almost ritual silence. Discreet curtains filtered the midday light, casting a somber tone that reflected the power within. Ji-hoon Park, seated at a large, dark wooden desk, watched the surveillance screens broadcasting real-time information from the main hall. His eyes, attentive and fixed, never missed a single detail. As manager Min Seo spat accusations with unbridled fury, he watched Ha-yoon's every expression, every failed attempt at defense, every suppressed tear that threatened to escape. The contrast between the brutality of her words and the young woman's fragility seemed to grow in intensity, as if the cameras were magnifying not only the image, but also the emotional weight of the entire scene. Ji-hoon was not a man accustomed to hesitation, but in that moment he remained motionless, observing silently, as if trying to understand to what extent injustice could reveal the essence of this employee forgotten by the hierarchy. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like spaced hammering, reminding him that time was passing without any intervention. However, inside him, a whirlwind of thoughts was building. Part of him demanded immediate action, a gesture that would end this shameful display, but another, more calculating part wanted to see how far Min Seo would allow himself to expose his own cruelty in front of so many eyes. Ji-hoon knew the smiling faces that inhabited his company, knew that many hid behind masks of efficiency and loyalty, but rarely did he have the opportunity to see so clearly who they were when they believed themselves beyond his reach. As Ha-yoon fell to her knees to gather the scattered leaves, something in her gaze caught his attention. It wasn't just resignation or pain. There was a spark of dignity there that stubbornly resisted even in the face of public humiliation. This silent flame intrigued him, awakening in him not only compassion, but also respect. Ji-hoon's fingers lightly touched the cool surface of the table, as if the pressure there could quell the urge to immediately descend to the hall. But he remained, breathing deeply, committing every detail to memory. His decision was still unclear to those around him, but deep inside, the silence was merely the prelude to something greater. And when Min Seo, in a theatrical gesture, decreed before everyone that Ha-yoon should leave the company, Ji-hoon's steady gaze remained fixed on the screen, as if in that instant he were ready to chart a new course. The question was, what would be the next step? The company hall, previously filled with whispers and veiled laughter, fell into an uncomfortable silence when Min Seo, inflated with her own authority, delivered the sentence that seemed definitive. Her words sounded like an unquestionable verdict. Seo Ha-yoon would no longer be part of that team. The announcement reverberated off the glass and marble walls like a sentence echoing in a courtroom. For most in attendance, it was just another spectacle of power. But for Ha-yoon, it signified the collapse of all the hopes carefully forged over months of sacrifice. She remained motionless for a few seconds, as if her body refused to obey the command echoing in the air. Her eyes fixed on the scattered sheets of paper on the floor, which now seemed even heavier than her own soul. When she finally found the strength to stand, her knees trembled and the worn folder slipped from her hands, betraying the fragility she was trying to hide. Each step toward the exit was accompanied by looks of varying nature, some of pity, others of scorn, many of pure indifference. It was as if the entire environment were imbued with a calculated coldness, in which one person's downfall was just another irrelevant detail in the relentless pace of work. Ha-eun, however, felt each look like a knife digging deeper into the open wound. In the hallway, Min-seo's heels still echoed, reaffirming the cruel victory she had won over someone defenseless. Ha-eun breathed heavily, and the tears, which had been held back, finally overflowed, sliding silently down her face. She tried to wipe them away with the back of her hand, but with each attempt, more tears came, as if her body finally gave in to the unbearable weight of shame. Arriving at the reception desk, she clutched her battered bag and crumpled resume, relics of a dream that seemed to have been crushed before it could even blossom. The receptionist, not daring to speak, simply averted her eyes, avoiding becoming an accomplice to this painful scene. The revolving door ahead seemed like another final barrier, signaling not only her departure from the company, but also the shattering of any remaining expectations of being recognized for her efforts. As she walked through the door and felt the cold soul air on her face, Ha-eun paused for a moment. The heavy traffic, the flashing signs, and the rush of people contrasted with her stillness. To everyone around her, she was just another young woman leaving a corporate building. But inside her, it was as if an entire universe had collapsed. Fate, however, had plans beyond her comprehension at that moment. For somewhere above, eyes that never wavered continued to follow her. Ji-hoon Park's silence wasn't empty. It was a harbinger of something about to happen. The question hanging in the air was, how long would this silence last? Back in Busan, Seo Ha-eun's small home felt even more cramped that night. The peeling walls held the heavy silence that had settled in since she'd returned from work early, revealing in her eyes the defeat of someone who'd been exposed in front of everyone. Her mother, lying on a simple mattress in the next room, noticed the lack of sparkle in her daughter's eyes, but didn't dare press her with questions. She simply offered a fragile smile, as if trying to heal invisible wounds with a gesture of affection. Ha-eun locked herself in her tiny room, lit only by a yellowish bulb hanging from the ceiling. She sat at the small desk where she kept magazine clippings of dresses she dreamed of designing. She touched the images gently, as if to remind herself that there was still beauty amidst the chaos. Yet the tears began to fall again, streaming silently down her cheeks as her crumpled resume lay on the table, reminding her that her efforts had not been enough to secure a place in Seoul's cutthroat corporate world. It was at that moment, amidst the silence broken only by the distant sound of city horns, that the phone rang. The shrill sound made her heart race. Rarely did anyone call at that hour. And for a moment she considered not answering, but the insistence forced her to stand and with trembling hands raise the phone to her ear. "Hello?" His voice was hesitant, almost choked. From the other side, a firm but surprisingly calm male voice filled the space. "Seo Ha-eun? This is Ji-hoon Park." Her heart skipped a beat. The name sounded so far from reality, almost unreal. Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't respond. "I saw what happened today," he continued, with a serenity that contrasted with the harshness of the memory. "I want to speak with you in person. Tomorrow, come to my office in Seoul." Ha-eun almost dropped the phone. Her mind was buzzing with doubts. Was this some kind of trap? An even greater humiliation? Or was there an unexpected chance to rewrite her story? While his voice could barely form a response, Ji-hoon finished firmly, "Don't miss it." The sharp click of the switch echoed like a decree. Ha-eun stood there, motionless, staring into space, her mind struggling to comprehend what this meant. What could such a powerful man want with someone as insignificant as her? And on that sleepless night, as the moon reflected on the Busan Sea, the question burning in her mind gave her no rest. What would happen when she finally came face to face with Ji-hoon Park? The next morning, Ha-eun's heart seemed to be racing from the moment she left her small home in Busan. The bullet train that took her to Seoul sped past mountains and distant skyscrapers, but to her, every minute felt like a rehearsal for everything that might happen. Her fingers clutched the strap of her worn bag tightly, as if that gesture could contain the anxiety consuming her. The reflection in the glass showed a pale face, with subtle dark circles under her eyes, but also a silent determination that grew stronger with every kilometer traveled. Arriving at the imposing Park Corporation Tower, her steps faltered before the revolving glass doors. The building seemed to swallow everyone who entered, with its cold grandeur and impeccably lit corridors. Hurrying employees passed by her, ignoring the presence of the young woman in simple clothing that clashed with the luxurious surroundings. Still, she took a deep breath and pressed on, determined to face the unknown. On the top floor, a receptionist led her to the CEO's office. The doors opened slowly, revealing a spacious space decorated in sober shades of grey and ivory, where the silence seemed to carry its own weight. Ji-hoon Park was waiting, seated behind a desk of minimalist design, but with an imposing presence. His erect posture and fixed gaze conveyed authority, but there was something else in his expression, a restrained curiosity that softened the usual coldness of executives like him. Ha-eun approached with short steps, her heart pounding against her chest as if it wanted to escape. When she stopped before him, she encountered neither the sarcasm she feared nor the arrogance she expected. She found silence. Ji-hoon watched her intently, as if every detail of her appearance held answers he still sought. "I saw everything," he said finally, his voice deep, slow, but surprisingly calm. "I want to hear your version." The words, simple in their form, were like a crack in the darkness that enveloped the young woman. Ha-eun took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to speak. But for a moment her throat felt closed by the weight of the memory. Her eyes welled up, and she looked away, staring at the ground as if needing support to sustain her voice. Ji-hoon didn't interrupt her. He simply waited, remaining still, letting the silence fill the room and give her courage a chance. For someone like Ha-eun, accustomed to being silenced or ignored, that simple act of listening was in itself a gesture of respect. The clock ticked away, as if time had slowed down. Finally, she looked up and with a choked voice spoke the first words that would begin the revelation of her full truth. And in that instant, the air between them changed, charged with something that went beyond the formality of a work conversation. Because deep down, they both knew nothing would be the same once she started talking. Ha-eun's first words came out fragile, as if each syllable needed to penetrate an invisible wall erected by shame and the fear of being discredited once again. Her choked voice trembled in the silent air of the room, but Ji-hoon Park was unhurried. He remained still, attentive, uninterrupted, as if he had all the time in the world to listen to every detail. That in itself struck him as odd. No one had ever stopped to listen to his version of events before. She began by explaining that she hadn't even touched the documents used to accuse her. She recounted how she'd been sent only to deliver them from one department to another, only to receive the manager's wrath for a mistake that wasn't her fault. She spoke of the tasks that always fell to her, the overtime that was never recorded, and the looks of contempt that constantly judged her for her plain appearance. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, not because the pain lessened, but because the need to be heard outweighed any fear. Ji-hoon, his hands clasped together on the table, watched her with an almost uncomfortable intensity. His eyes never wavered, and Ha-eun's every gesture registered as if it were part of a confession he dared not miss. He realized that even in tears, there was a steadfastness about her that stood out. She wasn't just a defenseless young woman. She was someone who had learned to resist the weight of life, even when everything around her seemed to be pushing her to the ground. Tears streamed down Ha-eun's face, but instead of diminishing her presence, they made her words more powerful. When she described how she had so often swallowed humiliation in silence to avoid losing her job, the emotion in the room was almost palpable. Her body trembled, but there was a spark of dignity in every sentence. It was as if finally she could free herself from all the bonds that had suffocated her for months. For a moment, silence stretched after she finished. Ha-eun lowered her head, embarrassed that she'd let her tears spill over, thinking she'd said too much. She expected a lecture, or perhaps a cold remark that would dash any hope, but neither came. Ji-hoon leaned forward slightly, his eyes still fixed on her, and took a deep breath before speaking. "You were strong," he said quietly but firmly. "Strong for enduring what you did and still maintaining your dignity." Ha-eun stared at him in surprise. The words weren't empty consolation, but genuine recognition. For the first time, someone inside that company saw her as something more than a disposable part, and in that moment, a thick silence hung between them. It wasn't an uncomfortable emptiness, but a space filled with something new, almost impossible to name. Ji-hoon didn't say anything else, but his eyes spoke volumes. He had made a decision, still kept secret, but one that would change everything that came next. Outside, the city continued its hurried pace, oblivious to the encounter that could transform not only the life of a young woman, but also that of the man who now saw in her an unexpected strength. And as Ha-eun breathed heavily, trying to comprehend what that recognition meant, a doubt crept in like an inevitable whisper. If Ji-hoon believed her, what would he do in the face of all the others who had condemned her? The next morning dawned differently inside the Park Corporation Tower. The usual hubbub of the hallways seemed more intense, as if everyone sensed something unusual was about to happen. The official announcement, calling for an emergency meeting, surprised employees across all departments, sparking speculation that rippled through the elevators and coffee rooms. Min Seo, confident as ever, walked with his head held high, believing he would once again receive the board's approval for his efficiency in maintaining discipline. The main hall was hastily prepared, chairs lined up, projectors turned on, microphones adjusted. The CEO's presence at a regular meeting was already a rare occurrence. But that day, Ji-hoon Park not only appeared, but also took center stage, imposing himself with a sobriety that made every eye turn to him. Ha-eun, summoned unexpectedly, entered shyly, remaining in the background, not understanding why she had been summoned to witness this. Silence fell as Ji-hoon looked up at the gathered crowd. With firm steps, he walked to the podium and without hesitation activated the screen behind him. The security camera footage began to play before everyone. Every second of Ha-eun's humiliation replayed in stark detail, exposing not only the injustice, but also Min Seo's ruthless stance. The murmurs grew louder, incredulous faces exchanged glances, and the weight of the truth fell like a chain no one could break. Min Seo, once haughty, paled, trying to hide her tension with a nervous, unconvincing smile. Ha-eun, motionless, felt her palms sweat and her heart pound, unable to believe what she was seeing. The same scene that had destroyed her the day before was now being used as evidence in her favor. When the video ended, there was absolute silence. Ji-hoon, his voice deep and controlled, dropped each word like a hammer. Seo Ha-eun didn't do anything wrong. She was the target of injustice and public's humiliation without any basis. The weight of the statement echoed like thunder. Some employees lowered their heads, embarrassed that they had laughed or watched in silence. Others stared at Min Seo with expressions of contempt. This kind of behavior Ji-hoon continued, his gaze sweeping across the crowd and settling on the manager, is not only intolerable, it's shameful. Min-seo tried to argue, her trembling voice escaping in barely articulated protests, but was silenced by the CEO's firm gesture. He didn't need to raise his voice. His authority was enough to crush any attempt at defense. And then, in front of everyone, he turned to Ha-eun, beckoning her forward. The young woman walked hesitantly, each step seeming heavier than the last, until she found herself facing all the eyes that had once judged her. Ji-hoon kept his eyes fixed on her, and his voice, though firm, carried a different, almost personal nuance. She was wrongly accused, but here is proof of her innocence. From today onwards, she will no longer be treated as a mere temporary assistant. Shock rippled through the room like lightning. Ha-eun felt her legs weaken, her mind unable to process what she had heard. Whispers erupted among those present, while Min-seo seemed to cower in the face of her own ruin. Justice, so unlikely the day before, now manifested itself in an undeniable way. But deep down, something still remained suspended in the air, because Ji-hoon's decision wasn't limited to simply righting an injustice. It carried a greater weight, an intention that reached far beyond the walls of that room. And as Ha-eun tried to catch her breath at the turnaround, an inevitable question arose like a collective whisper. What, after all, would the CEO do from that moment on? Silence still gripped the room after the cameras had been revealed. The weight of Ji-hoon Park's words lingered in the air like a sentence no one dared dispute. Min-seo, defeated, remained with her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to maintain her arrogance in the face of indisputable proof. However, just when everyone thought the spectacle would end there, Ji-hoon stepped forward and, with the same deep voice that had echoed minutes before, made a statement that would completely change the course of history. Starting today, Seo Ha-eun will not only be reinstated, he said, pausing to let each ear absorb the information, but she will also begin working directly with me on strategic corporate projects. The words descended upon the audience like an unexpected storm. Startled glances met, murmurs spread like wildfire, and even the most indifferent employees raised their heads in shock. It was unthinkable. A temporary assistant, publicly humiliated, not only exonerated, but elevated to a position alongside the CEO himself. Ha-eun, paralyzed, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her heart was pounding, and for a moment, she believed it was nothing more than a delirious dream, a daydream brought on by the exhaustion of the past few days. But Ji-hoon's steady gaze brought her back to reality. He wasn't speaking simply as a CEO. There was something more to his stance, a personal decision that transcended the cold logic of the corporate world. Discomfort spread among the directors and supervisors who tried to mask their surprise with neutral expressions. Some, silently, were already calculating the impact of the decision, while others were seething with envy at the sudden rise of the young woman who, until yesterday, had been the butt of jokes. Ha-eun, however, couldn't move. Her teary eyes met Ji-hoon's for a moment, and in that brief exchange of glances, something was said without words. This wasn't just a promotion. It was an invitation to enter a world she'd never imagined belonging to. And as the hallways buzzed with chatter, a new tension arose in the young woman's heart. After all, what did it really mean to be chosen by the most powerful man in the company? The days following the fateful meeting plunged Park Corporation into a climate of speculation and contained unease. Seo Ha-eun's name, previously completely unknown in the company's corridors, now circulated like an insistent whisper, laden with malicious interpretations, exaggerated curiosity, and hasty judgments. Some employees regarded her with veiled contempt, as if her presence were a mistake that insisted on persisting. Others regarded her with barely concealed envy, unable to comprehend how someone so unassuming had managed to reach such close proximity to the CEO. But behind all this superficial commotion, something much more delicate and dangerous was silently beginning to form. The slow and inevitable rapprochement between Ha-eun and Ji-hoon Park. The new professional routine forced the two to interact directly and constantly. Ha-eun now participated in private meetings, reviewed confidential reports, and was frequently called to discuss projects in closed rooms. At first, she could barely breathe in Ji-hoon's imposing presence. His posture was rigid, his voice hesitant, and the fear of failure made her question every word before speaking. However, as the days progressed, something unexpected began to happen. The silence between them, previously fraught with tension, became comfortable, almost intimate. Ji-hoon, accustomed to the empty flattery and institutionalized falsehood of the corporate world, found himself intrigued by Ha-eun. There was a raw truth about her, a complete absence of artifice that effortlessly disarmed him. She didn't try to please him, didn't sugarcoat opinions, didn't use words to win him over, and precisely because of that, she won him over. He began to notice small gestures, discreet reactions, restrained smiles, and began to wait for them like someone waiting for a breeze in the middle of the desert. As much as they both tried to keep their relationship within professional boundaries, there were times when words disappeared and a lingering look was all it took for the air around them to thicken. They knew they were crossing an invisible line, but each step in that direction felt inevitable, as if something larger was driving them, something that not even the fear of scandal could contain. Night fell over Seoul, its vibrant lights reflected in the windows of the skyscrapers, while Seo Ha-eun's heart raced at the unexpected call she had received hours earlier. Ji-hoon Park had invited her to a private dinner, not in a luxurious restaurant surrounded by curious gazes, but in a private space on the top floor of the building where it all began. The dining room, prepared just for the two of them, was illuminated by soft lights that created an intimate atmosphere, far removed from the suffocating weight of the corporate routine. Ha-eun entered the room with hesitant steps, her eyes scanning every detail as if searching for clues to the reason for their meeting. The table was set elegantly but without ostentation, and Ji-hoon was standing there waiting for her, his gaze firm yet charged with a rare emotion beyond his usual control. He made a discreet gesture, inviting her to sit, and the initial silence was broken only by the soft clink of the cutlery arranged on the table. For long minutes, trivial words were exchanged, but they both knew that wasn't the reason they were there. Ha-eun, hands in her lap, held her breath, trying to hide the swirl of feelings growing within her. Ji-hoon, for his part, watched her every gesture, every shy glance, as if summoning the courage to cross the last barrier that still separated them. Finally, he took a deep breath, leaning forward slightly, and his voice, firm but full of sincerity, cut through the air. Ha-eun, I not only believed in you when everyone condemned you, but I also realized something bigger. He paused for a moment, allowing his words to find a place in her heart. I fell in love with your courage, your dignity, and the way you never let injustice steal who you truly are. Tears welled in Ha-eun's eyes before she could even formulate a response. The weight of all her humiliation seemed to melt away at that unexpected confession. Her voice was shaky, but filled with emotion. I don't know if I deserve all this, but for the first time, I feel like I'm not alone. Ji-hoon smiled, a rare and sincere gesture, and reached across the table. Ha-eun hesitantly let her fingers intertwine with his. as if that simple touch sealed not just a beginning, but the promise of a transformed life. Outside, the city continued its frenetic pace, but for them, in that moment, time seemed suspended, as if the entire universe had stopped just to witness the birth of something new. And so, against the illuminated soul night, the silence that had once been marked by pain now became the perfect setting for hope to blossom. What had begun as a story of humiliation turned into redemption, and what had seemed impossible now revealed itself as the beginning of a love destined to defy all barriers. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to believe in true love, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories to come.